Hello and welcome. If you are new here, my name is Ruby. I'm a professional psychic medium, tarot reader, astrologer, and priestess. And today is going to be the beginning in an end of year tarot and oracle deck review series. So working with tarot and oracle is not only one of my favorite parts of my own personal spiritual journey, but the work that I do with my clients as well. And we are kicking off the end of the year deck review with this video, which is going to be my most used decks this year in my professional practice. So I work with decks professionally very differently than I work with them personally. And so in this video, I will show you the decks that ended up just showing up again and again in client readings, how long I've had them, and the purpose that they serve in my professional client work. So all of these decks I either use in one-on-one work with my clients, or they showed up a lot in the Patreon readings. I have a Patreon where I do hours and hours of extra content you can't find anywhere else. And included in that is a lot of collective readings. And this list encompasses, again, decks I've had for several years and some decks I purchased this year as well. So this is a little different than the favorite deck lists that I do, where I try to really cap it to my favorite decks that I purchased in the year that I am doing an end of year review list, just to kind of consolidate my choices a little bit. So without further ado, favorite, or not favorite, I'm already messing this video up. Most used decks professionally. I have 2 tarot decks on this list and a handful more oracle. So the first tarot deck on this list, we'll start with tarot, is the Pagan Otherworlds Tarot by Uva Usi. I believe this is independently produced. This is the tuck box right here. I have it out, but the cards were not in it. So fairly simple deck and box. I believe that there is a guidebook for this deck that you can purchase separately. I do not own the guidebook. I just have the deck. I got this deck for Christmas last year, and it stayed in my hand till pretty much July, when I got the second deck on this list, the second tarot deck on this list. I love reading with this deck from a divinatory perspective. This deck and I have a really beautiful working relationship. Now, all of the minor arcana for this deck are pips, which is really typically not my style. I actually really avoid purchasing decks where the minor is going to be pips, but for whatever reason in this deck, it really speaks to me. It's going to have all your standard major and minor arcana cards, and then it has these moon phases cards. Now, I use the moon phase cards more as an indicator of timing. So for a full moon, I would say, if I'm, talking with somebody about a certain circumstance in their life, I'll say, oh, and it's peaking right now. This is the culmination of this particular circumstance. And if it was a new moon card, I would say, oh, we're at the very beginning of this particular situation, life circumstance, karmic lesson, etc. So again, it's one of these felt sense things. I can't tell you exactly why I love this deck or why we got along so well. I love this Queen of Wands. The Queen of Wands is my significator. But right out of the box, we had a really beautiful and effective working relationship. As you can see, some of my card edges are worn because I have used this deck that much. I'm a very high volume reader. It is not unusual for me to have up to, I've really pared it down, but when I was at a shop 4 or 5 days a week, which I was at the very beginning of 2024, I could have about 10 readings a day even. Now I try not to do more than 4, but my readings are longer now. So this year I transitioned from reading in a shop and sprinkling that in with virtual readings to doing 95% virtual readings and sprinkling in seeing clients in person at a shop every now and then. And so this deck I've used in both formats, virtually and in person. But when I was in person, at a shop, I only want to bring one tarot deck with me and one oracle to clarify. And this is the tarot deck that I would bring every day for months and months and months and months. And I did not stray much from it the first half of the year when it came to decks that I was using professionally. I use this deck in client readings, I use this deck in Patreon readings, I use this deck in past life readings. So we're kind of taking a break now just because the next deck on this list is the one that really took up the mantle that this deck had. But she's still in my drawer of, decks to have on hand at any given moment. So most of my decks are behind me, and then I have more decks in another shelf. I wouldn't say most of my decks behind me. A few of my decks are behind me. I have a lot more in another bookshelf. And then right in one of the drawers in my desk, I have like the decks that cannot leave my side, because if I am virtually with a client, all I have to do is open it and there it is. And this deck still lives there. So it has not traveled too far from its original role in my life. So that is the Sistine Tarot by, I think it's Uva Usi is the name of the company that created this one. Next deck on this list, unfortunately, is out of print. You can no longer purchase it, but it is the Sistine Tarot by Rose Bay Tarot. This deck completely changed my life and expanded the possibility of what a deck could be for me. And I have legitimate anxiety that I only have one copy of this deck. I purchased this deck on the last day it was available for purchase. If I had purchased it any sooner and this deck had come in the mail while there was time to get more, I, no joke, would have probably purchased 5 more copies. This is a very bittersweet lesson in the reality of life, that nothing's gonna last forever. And at the rate I use this deck, it is most definitely not going to last forever. And that, like I said, brings me a genuine sense of angst. I can't imagine my life without this deck. So if you have a copy that you don't want, I will pay good money for it. But I doubt anyone does not want a copy of this deck. Now, I love religious art. I have a religious art addiction. You should see my Pinterest. Not only that, 3 of the major deities that I work with, Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, Yeshua, Jesus Christ. This deck blends religious symbolism with pop culture iconography perfectly. This deck almost like came out of my essence and my psyche. This deck is my psyche. There's 2 Lana Del Rey cards in this deck. Like, you have no idea how much this deck speaks to me. And when I first purchased it and I realized that I could never purchase it again, and I only had 1 copy. Look at this Madonna as the Leo card. I was like, I'm not going to use this deck very much. This is just going to be a personal deck. And then I did 1 client reading with it, and that was it. It became my daily driver ever since. So I use this deck professionally. It is still the deck that I'm using in almost every client reading. There are some additional cards within this deck that really amplify it for me when it comes to what a deck can hold in a professional capacity. So this deck also has 12 zodiac cards, and it also has a few other cards that are more theme cards, which I'll show you as it comes up. And the additional cards really assist me, particularly in the past life readings that I do, even though I use this deck for any and every kind of reading. To me, this deck is like if the Ritual Tarot and the Goddess of Love had a baby, and that baby wore like red lipstick and blue eyeshadow and was like covered in glitter. Like if if the Ritual Tarot and the Goddess of Love Tarot had a baby in a rose garden, and then that baby went on and starred in Euphoria. I don't know. I'm speaking nonsense, but this deck is everything to me. Look at this, Empress. And I honestly feel bad showing it to you because you can't purchase it anymore, but I also feel bad for myself because I can no longer purchase this deck anymore. So, life lesson. We all have a limited shelf life on this planet, don't we? So, a good lesson in the cycles of life. Anyways, I will stop talking and move to the next deck. But this deck is still my daily driver. I love her so much. I have taken her traveling with me all over. Like, she's been to music festivals with me. She's been in my purse when I'm like going to shows. I probably like took her to see Charlie XCX at the Sweat tour. Like, she's so good. That is the Sistine Tarot. Let's move on to Oracle decks, shall we? Because there's actually probably double the amount of Oracle decks than I have for Tarot. Like I said, when I was mainly in seeing clients in person at a metaphysical store, I could bring as many decks as I wanted to, but just for ease of transportation, I would bring one Tarot and one Oracle. When I am seeing clients virtually, I tend to stick to between 1 and 2 tarot decks, but I will have more Oracle decks at my disposal, right? Because I've got like full access to all my decks. So I might bring in about 2 Oracle decks to 1 tarot, depending on how I want to clarify. Now, the first deck on this list, I'm not going to speak too much about because I just waxed poetic about her in the shadow work deck recommendation video I recently made. But this is the Vampir Oracle by Lucy Cavendish. It is a mass market deck. Now, I've had this deck for years. I purchased it not knowing anything about it. It kind of sat dormant on my shelf for a while. And then maybe 2 years ago, I picked it up, did a client reading with it, and was like, this deck reads amazing as a tool for my professional readings. So when I first bought this deck, I think I was doing it like a daily draw in the guidebook, and it just didn't really hit for me in a way that I felt compelled to keep using it. As a tool in my professional collection, this deck feels invaluable. This deck feels irreplaceable. Now, I use this deck in every single past life reading that I do. My past life readings are usually the Sistine Tarot, the Vampir Oracle, and then one other deck that gets rotated in and out. But those are pretty much my past life staples. I very much consider this a shadow work deck. So in past life readings, we're basically all doing shadow work because shadow work is what is in the unconscious, in the subconscious. It's not in conscious awareness. And so all past life readings, I'm really just tapping into the shadow of the client that I'm reading for. Now, I also use this in just regular readings. And it's primarily a tool I use professionally, but if I just want to know why someone is acting the way that they are, or what is motivating me that I don't see clearly, I will definitely use this deck. And I could probably, for myself, and I could probably do a full reading just with this deck if I had to, probably pretty easily. And sometimes I'll use it as just a general clarifier for tarot as well. It's really multi-purpose in how I use it professionally. So that is the Vampir, and it's so funny because when I got this deck, I didn't really think it was my style of artwork, but so many people tell me this deck and I match. So what do you think? I think it's the giant eyes. So Les Vampire Oracle, very affordable, mass market. The last thing that I'm going to say about this, for how much I use this deck, I use this deck as much as I've used the other 2 tarot decks on the collection that are visibly worn. Like at one point, the Sistine Tarot had gilded edges. It does not have gilded edges anymore. I do not fault the deck creator for this, by the way. I have really, really, really used this deck. But for the amount I have used this deck, I feel it has stayed in pristine condition. When it comes to quality, nothing beats, when it comes to a mass market deck, the Blue Angel Oracle decks that come in this typical box size. I have Alana Fairchild decks that are these mass market Blue Angel Oracle decks that I've had for years and years and years. Like, and I love the size of the box. Like, I love how it displays. I'm a big fan of the Blue Angel Oracle decks. Next deck on the list is sadly damaged. I need to repurchase this deck, but to not include it would be to be disingenuous to the whole purpose of this video. And it is the Spirit Cards Oracle deck by John Mosley. This is independently produced, but I believe you can purchase it on Amazon. It's a little bit of a higher price point. I think it's worth it. It came with this really cutie cute bag you could store the deck in, and the guidebook is also excellent, though when I am using this deck for clients, I'm not consulting the guidebook. This deck I primarily used as a way that I would seal the reading. So if I was both doing a collective reading for my Patreon, or I was in a one-on-one reading with a client, 5 minutes, 2 minutes before the reading is going to be wrapped up, I will pivot to using this deck to, like I said, seal the reading with a final blessing or a final clarifying message. Now, I really enjoy how multi-purpose this deck is, and see, this is what happened to this deck. It got sticky or something, and all of the cards kind of stuck together, and then we have this really sad damage to the cards. And I don't know how this happened, except it happened right after a person came and stayed with me who was brought in some chaotic energy. So I think that's kind of what happened, because I for sure I'm very, very careful around what is around my decks. And, is there anything that could spill on them, etc. So honestly, this deck might have come into bad shape because I burned her out. That's one thing that you'll probably glean from this particular video, is that I tend to really, I don't want to say burn my decks out, but how I work with decks professionally, very different than how I work with them personally. I'm much more polyamorous in my personal deck, like how I use personal decks. It's my professional decks. If I have a good working relationship with a deck, I will use it and use it and use it and use it until I either need a break because I'm a little sick of looking at it, or the deck is like noped out. It's been like energetically tapped. This one might have gotten energetically tapped specifically because I feel like it resonates at this really high frequency. There's a really high dimension. Now, this deck is really great for if you are on an earth-based path. There's lots of earth spirits, there's lots of elemental energies to this deck, there's lots of animal guides to this deck, and it feels very multi-dimensional, and I would use this as more of a regular clarifier for tarot sometimes as well, because it does have these keywords at the bottom, which I know it's kind of hard to see the cards sometimes with my ring light. I need to figure out that situation soon. I've been avoiding it a little bit because I don't really like technology, I'm not gonna lie. So really, really, really gorgeous artwork. Really sweet, high vibrational energy. I use this deck, like I said, more to pull in blessings. So especially if we had done more of a shadow work, heavy reading. All right, what do you need to know that's going to help you? This is just making me sad pulling these cards apart. So I will be repurchasing this one. The reason why I haven't repurchased it is because when I saw what had happened to this poor deck, I was like, maybe she needed a break. Maybe I did this to her. So she's been on the shelf for a little bit, but I used her a lot this year. Now, the next deck on this list is probably going to surprise no one, and it is the Herbal astrology deck. Oh, who created this deck? The creator of Anima Mundi Herbals. Her name is slipping my mind at the moment, but Hay House was the publisher of this deck. I believe I heard that this deck is no longer available for purchase, but there's a pocket edition that now is, or maybe a later edition that now is. I can't imagine not having this deck in my collection. I've already talked about this deck in length, but the blending of the planetary correspondences with the plant spirit, the plant ally, and a keyword makes it very, very versatile. You can use it for ritual work. You can use it for expanding your knowledge, your practical knowledge around both astrology and herbalism. And it's really been a very effortless read for using it in client readings as well. So I've used this deck in a lot of Patreon readings. I've used this deck in a lot of client readings. I love the artwork. I love the backings. And I can't imagine not having this one around. It's, again, one of those decks that stays in my little on hand at all times tarot and oracle drawer. And I especially like using it for group readings. So if I'm ever doing like a live reading, we do live readings on the Patreon once a month, or if I'm reading for a group of people in person, this tends to be the oracle deck that I will use specifically for that purpose. Now, the next oracle deck on this list, I actually haven't used for quite some time, but she was a daily driver for me. Pretty much, I think I got her in fall of 2023. This is the Illuminated Earth Oracle by Claire Mack. I believe you can purchase this on Claire Mack's website. But used this deck as my main clarifier for oracle pretty much from January of this past year to maybe late spring. Again, if I could only bring 2 decks with me, I was pretty much gonna bring all late winter of last year until early spring, the Pagan Otherworlds, and the Earthbound, or the Illuminated Earth Oracle. Sorry, this is the Illuminated Earth Oracle. I was getting oracle names mixed up for a minute. This deck is so unique. First of all, it's a larger size. It is 63 cards, and you can almost read this, turn this into a Lenormand, read this in a way that really blends the lines between tarot and oracle. Now, this isn't based on a tarot system at all, but when it comes to how I used this deck professionally, I would use this deck the way I use tarot. I would utilize it for more, I don't really use spreads in my personal practice, but I will tend to draw around 5 cards at a time when I'm reading. And I tend to will draw like 5 cards with tarot, and then I'll do 1 card to clarify with an oracle. Not so with this oracle deck. I would draw 3, 5 cards at a time and work with it very much in a same type of co-working relationship that I would work with a tarot deck. Now, this deck feels very neutral and very practical when you are using it to do divinatory work for another person. I felt like this deck could get me to the meat of the reading, or really hand me a lot of the necessary details in a way that was very efficient. When I was working at primarily at a metaphysical store at the beginning of the year, sometimes you only have 20 minutes with a client. So it's preferable for me to pull in the necessary information as quickly as I can. This deck was really helpful for that. Now that I've transitioned to mostly virtual readings, and I can marinate in the reading a little more, she hasn't come out as much. Also, again, we kind of needed a break. She probably needed a rest, a good long sleep after how much I worked with her. But she is one of those decks that I don't think you'll ever regret having in your collection because she's so useful. You know, it's interesting because when it comes to the oracle decks on this list, with the exception of the Herbal astrology oracle, I would never come out and say that these are my favorites. Because to me, favorite is touching a different part of my essence, right? Like the Sistine Tarot is my favorite because she feels like an extension of my own soul. The Illuminated Earth Oracle, I keep messing the name of this oracle up, is not my favorite deck, and I don't feel that she speaks to my soul per se in a personal way, but I feel that she is an essential and necessary tool of my craft. Or she was at one point in this year, and she probably will be again. You know, I really go through ebbs and tides, especially with the decks that I'm using in my professional work. So one more deck on this list, and I was really surprised when I was really contemplating what tarot and oracle decks were going to make the list. There's other tarot decks that I use throughout the year. I just wouldn't be able to tell you what they were because they were so much the two decks that I mentioned. Like that was just so much of what this year was. When it came to oracle, when I was thinking about the decks that I used all year, I was like, it couldn't be this deck. But it really was. I utilized this deck a lot in my professional work, and it is the Mary Magdalene Oracle by Megan Watterson. Now, a deck like this isn't a deck that I would normally turn to when it comes to client work. I don't even know how she started showing up in client readings. I think it was that she started coming out for my Patreon readings, and so then she was just around. And then maybe once I was reading for a client and just intuitively picked this deck up, and then I just intuitively kept picking it up. This is a deck that I am still using. I wouldn't say frequently in my client work, but probably at least in one reading a week she comes out. Now, this deck is not my favorite artwork. It's not horrible, but it's not my favorite. To me, this is a little bit of an example of collage style artwork I don't enjoy. This is a mass market deck. Looking at the box, Hay House is the publisher, which makes a lot of sense. This deck specifically focuses on the teachings of Mary Magdalene as are laid out in the Gospel of Mary. And if you've read Mary Magdalene Revealed by Megan Watterson, who is also the creator of this deck, I recommend that book to people who are just beginning their journey with Mary Magdalene. I think it's a great jumping off point to her essential teachings. If you're familiar with that book, this deck is very much a continuation of that book. And is a deck that I was expecting to use primarily just for personal spiritual work. Now, this is an example of some of that collage work I don't really enjoy. Like, why do we need collage style text here when the text is down below? You might love it. It's just not personally my preferred taste. Now, I use this deck for client work in a very specific way. I don't really use it to clarify. I don't use it for shadow work. works very different than, say, the Illuminated Earth Oracle by Claire Mack. I use this deck to bring in a message from my clients' guides around the spiritual purpose of their current circumstance, or how their guides are encouraging them to move through a current season or circumstance. This is more of the higher spiritual guidance. Now, I might as well just give you an example of this because that might be easier to kind of show you rather than tell you. Now, one of the reasons this comes out so much in my Patreon readings is that that's what I'm doing in those readings. When we're reading collectively in my Patreon, we're coming at it from, okay, what is the spiritual guidance for the week? How is Spirit encouraging us to navigate these current energies? So I'm using it that way in a client reading, but specific to that client's circumstance. So let's just do a little, we'll just do a little guided practice here. Tutorial is the word I'm searching for. And then we will end our time together because this is the last deck on the list. Okay, so for example, if my client came to me with a certain set of circumstances and I was using this deck, I would be using the cards that I just pulled to bring in the soul wisdom and how she can move through her current circumstances from a place of staying connected to her highest good and her evolutionary intent. So just based on the cards that I am seeing, I am pulling in that this would probably be a relationship reading for my client. And so I would tell my client, all right, right now you are moving through potentially a karmic time in your relationships. You're moving through a time where you're being encouraged to consider what love means to you. And if you can untether what love means from any cultural programming or conditioning or familial traditioning that may not serve you, can you become rooted in a love that is without condition or stipulation? Can the love you give for another person be a reflection of the own love your higher self has for you? And do you have any blocks to accessing that? You may have been conditioned into a way of loving that was karmic in nature, that you are now ready to shed so you can understand what true love, love that comes from soul, love that comes from a place of source is. And this is the work that you are doing this lifetime. This is some of the evolutionary work that is unfolding for you. And you might be somebody, and also if this reading resonates for you, please take it. It's coming through the channel for sure. If you are somebody that orients yourself to giving others and serving others, amazing. But it's possible that you are giving others and serving others from a place of deficiency of love in yourself. You don't feel like you are worthy, so you're giving and giving and giving and giving to somehow fill this worth hole that is ancestral or karmic in nature. So you can keep giving, but what if you came from a place of feeling resourced? What if you came from a full cup? Because the giving and giving and giving and giving from an empty cup, you might think you're being a good person, but you're actually just repeating a karmic pattern. And you came this lifetime to shift this karmic pattern. So we might be talking about some codependency, some love addiction, some people pleasing. When I'm saying this to you, that doesn't mean, okay, you don't get to have love in your life because this is your karmic work. It's that love is so important to you this lifetime. It's time for you to transcend it into a higher frequency and a higher vibration that fully supports you and doesn't weigh you down. Okay, so really good example of how you can use this deck to pull in higher spiritual guidance. Now, 3 cards, I just threw a lot of information at you with 3 cards. And so that's what a good deck will do. A good deck will give you enough of a jumping off point that you can become the vessel and the channel for the wisdom. It gives you enough of an orientation to the message that you can begin to fill in the gaps and add the flourishes and the added material that's needed to paint the picture in a way where you're speaking directly to the need that you are meeting in the one-on-one client work. Okay, so that completes decks I used most this year in my professional practice. If you want me to do a deck list entailing the decks I use most for my personal practice, I'm happy to, if that is of interest of you. I'm also starting to scheme what is going to show up on my favorite tarot and oracle decks for the year. So that is very exciting and also a little overwhelming because some of my favorite oracle decks didn't show up until very recently. So it's like, what can we add and what have we not spent enough time with to add or not add? Now, I do offer one-on-one readings. I'm really bad at promoting myself. I offer one-on-one readings that you can find in the detail or the description link for this video. I believe I am booked out until maybe first week of January. So there's a little bit of a wait time, but that exists. I also talked about my Patreon a lot this video because of the content. If you are interested in that Patreon link is also in the description box as well. Again, it's lots of consistent weekly content that you can't find anywhere else. So I would love to see you there. And I will see you here again very soon for the rest of deck wrap up for the year. And I am sending you so much love.